$3.80. That's all she had. Enough for one bottle of milk. Her diabetic grandmother hadn't eaten since yesterday. She bought the milk, stepped into a Wisconsin blizzard, and saw him. A man on a bench, white, 60s, no coat, lips blue, shaking so hard he couldn't speak. Mabel Anderson didn't think twice. Didn't think about her grandmother waiting at home. Didn't think about the empty cupboards. She knelt beside a dying stranger, opened the bottle, and gave him the only food she had. She had no idea that the man had just turned down a $200 million offer.
The offer
No
was
idea
finally
he'd
accepted.
return 11 days later to change her life forever. The decision that should have cost her everything ended up giving her a future she never dared imagine. Man, giving away your last bit of food takes a special kind of heart. Let's get into it. But to understand why Mabel gave away the only thing she had that night, you need to understand the kind of life she'd been living. Collinsville, Wisconsin. Population under 3,000. 1 traffic light. 2 churches. A gas station that closes at 6. The kind of town where everybody knows whose electricity got shut off this month. And everybody knew about the Anderson house on Elm Street. Mabel lived with her grandmother, Ruth. 68 years old, diabetic, bad knees. A retired nurse's aide who spent 30 years caring for other people's parents until her own body gave out. Ruth raised Mabel since she was 4. Mabel's mother passed from lupus when Mabel was barely old enough to remember her face. Her father left before she was born. No letter, no phone call, just gone. So it was Ruth and Mabel. That was the whole family. Their house was a rented 2-bedroom with peeling siding and a furnace that worked when it felt like it. In January, they shared 1 bedroom to stay warm. Ruth sewed quilts from church donation fabric, stitched together pieces of other people's clothes to keep her granddaughter from freezing. The water heater broke in October. Mabel heated water on the stove every morning. She'd wake at 5:15, boil a pot, clean Ruth's insulin injection site, help her grandmother into her chair, make sure she took her pills. Then she'd walk 1.5 miles to school. The bus route got cut last year. Budget shortfalls. So Mabel walked. Rain, snow, wind that sliced through her coat like it wasn't there. She walked with her head down and her hands balled inside her pockets. She never missed a day, not one. Mabel was 18 now, a senior, months from graduation. But graduation felt more like a cliff than a finish line. She'd applied to 3 state colleges in the fall, all with financial aid forms. She hadn't heard back. She didn't talk about it. Didn't want Ruth lying awake feeling guilty about money they didn't have. After school, she worked part-time at Earl Dixon's corner store. Earl was a quiet black man who'd owned that store for 22 years. He paid Mabel what he could, and he let her take home dented cans and day-old bread. Some weeks, that was dinner. Mabel kept a small notebook, had it since she was 15, a habit her teacher, Mrs. Colleen Hayes, taught her. Every day, write down 1 good thing, no matter how small. Sun came out for 10 minutes. Found $1 in the parking lot. Grandma laughed at the TV. She never wrote down the bad days, never wrote about going to bed hungry, never wrote about the morning she opened the fridge and found nothing but mustard and baking soda. She never complained. Not once. Not about the cold. Not about saltine crackers and peanut butter for the 3rd night straight. The only time Mabel cried recently was the day Ruth's insulin went up $15. They did the math at the kitchen table. Medicine, or the electric bill. Not both. Ruth said they'd figure it out. Mabel nodded. Then she went to the bathroom, shut the door, and pressed a towel to her mouth so her grandmother wouldn't hear. That's Mabel. She carried everything. Quietly, without asking anyone to notice. Frost grew on the inside of their windows every night. Her only boots had split at the sole, so she stuffed plastic bags inside to keep the snow out. Worked for about 10 minutes. Then her socks got wet anyway, and she walked the rest of the way with her toes going numb. But every single night, Ruth made Mabel iron her school clothes. They pressed them on a towel spread across the kitchen table. "Just because we're poor doesn't mean we show up looking poor," Ruth would say. And Mabel pressed those clothes like she was getting ready for an interview. Crisp collar, straight seams. Because dignity was the one thing they could still afford. 2 doors down lived Brenda Stokes, loud, unkind. She told anyone who'd listen that Ruth should put that girl in the system if she couldn't feed her. Said it at the post office. Said it loud enough for Mabel to hear through the kitchen window one evening. Mabel didn't cry. She picked up her notebook and wrote, "I'm not a burden. I'm a blessing. Grandma said so." That was Mabel Anderson. 18. Broke. Hungry most nights. Cold most mornings. Still writing down the good things. Now. That Friday night. Ruth's blood sugar dropped dangerously low that afternoon. Her hands were shaking, words slurring. She needed real food, not crackers, not broth from a can, something with substance. Mabel went to the mason jar on the kitchen counter, counted the coins twice. $3.80, enough for 1 bottle of milk and a small loaf of bread. She pulled on her too small coat, tucked the coins into her mitten, and walked out into the dark toward Earl Dixon's store. She had no idea what was waiting for her at that bus stop. Nobody did. And then she saw him, and everything about that night shifted. The bell on Earl Dixon's door jingled when Mabel stepped inside. 6:40 in the evening. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The store smelled like cardboard and pine sol. Earl was behind the counter, leaning close to a weather radio. A woman's voice crackled through the static. Winter storm warning. Temperatures dropping to -15 by midnight. Wind chill, -30. Residents advised to stay indoors. Earl looked up. "You shouldn't be out tonight, Mabel." "I know." She was already heading toward the dairy aisle. "Grandma needs milk." She picked up 1 bottle of whole milk, $2.10. Then a small loaf of white bread, $1.50. She carried both to the counter and emptied her mitten onto the glass. Coins rolled in every direction. She sorted them, counted them again. $3.60, $3.70, $3.80. 20 cents left over. She slid the 20 cents back into her mitten. Savings for tomorrow. Earl rang her up without a word. Then, while Mabel was putting the coins into the register tray, he slipped an extra bread roll into her bag. Didn't charge her. Didn't even look at her when he did it. Just slid it in and closed the bag. Mabel saw. She didn't say anything. She just mouthed, "Thank you," and Earl just nodded. That was how kindness worked in Collinsville. Small. Quiet. No receipts. Mabel stepped outside and the wind hit her like a wall. The cold was sharp, instant, everywhere. She tucked the plastic bag against her chest, lowered her chin, and started walking. Elm Street was 6 blocks east. She knew the route with her eyes closed. Past the laundromat. Past the empty lot where the hardware store used to be. Past the bus stop on Crestwood Avenue. That's where she stopped. Someone was on the bench. A man. White. Probably early 60s, but he looked older tonight. He was sitting upright, barely. No coat. A thin button-down shirt, untucked, the kind you'd wear to an office. Dress shoes, no socks. His hands were balled into fists on his lap, shaking. His eyes were half closed. Mabel's first thought, the one she'd remember for years, was simple. Is he dead? She stepped closer. He was breathing, shallow, ragged. Each exhale came out in a thin cloud that the wind tore apart before it could form. The temperature was dropping fast. The streetlight above the bench flickered once, twice, then steadied. There was nobody else on the road. No cars, no voices. Just the wind and the sound of ice cracking somewhere in the trees. To the north, Mabel could see the cloud bank rolling in, a thick, dark wall swallowing the sky. The storm wasn't coming. It was here. She looked at his hands, red and raw. His fingertips had gone from red to white. His lips were a color lips shouldn't be, something between gray and violet. He wasn't drunk. She stepped close enough to know. No smell of alcohol, no bottles, nothing. He was just there, lost, disoriented, like someone had dropped him on this bench from another world. And then Mabel noticed three things. His left wrist had a pale tan line where a watch used to be. Not a cheap watch. The line was wide, clean, the kind of mark an expensive watch leaves after years. His shirt collar had a small monogram stitched into the fabric. She couldn't read the letters in the dark, but it was there. 2 initials, fine thread. And on his right hand, a gold ring, not a wedding band, something else. A signet ring with some kind of engraving she couldn't make out. He opened his eyes, looked at her. His jaw was trembling so hard his teeth clicked together. He tried to speak, couldn't. Just looked at her with the kind of eyes that say everything words can't. Help me. Mabel stood there on that sidewalk, holding a plastic bag with the only food her grandmother would eat tonight. Ruth was at home, blood sugar dangerously low. Hadn't had a real meal in over a day. Needed that milk. And this man was going to die on this bench if nobody helped him. The storm was minutes from full force. He had no shelter, no warmth, no food, nothing between him and the cold but a thin cotton shirt. Mabel was an 18-year-old black woman standing in front of a white man she didn't know, in a town that already talked about her family like they were a problem to be solved. She knew the math. She knew how this could look. She knew the story people would tell if something went wrong. But Mabel didn't think about any of that. She thought about what her grandmother always said. You help the person in front of you. That's all God ever asks. The wind picked up hard. The man's body sagged to the right. His eyes fluttered. He was losing consciousness. Mabel made her decision. What she did next would have been remarkable for anyone. For a young woman with nothing, it was something else entirely. Mabel set the bag on the ground. Her hands were shaking, not from fear, from the cold. She pulled out the bottle of milk, twisted the cap off, and knelt beside the man. Sir? Sir, can you hear me? Her voice was small, but steady. He blinked, slowly, like the sound of her voice had to travel a long distance to reach him. His eyes found her face. He tried to speak. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. Mabel held the bottle to his lips. Drink this. It's okay. Drink. He drank. Slowly at first. A sip. Then another. Then his body took over, and he drank in deep, desperate gulps. Milk ran down his chin, into the collar of his shirt. His hands came up to hold the bottle, but they were shaking too badly. He couldn't grip it. So Mabel held it for him. Both hands on the bottle, kneeling on frozen concrete in the wind, holding milk to a stranger's mouth like she was feeding a child. He drank half the bottle before she pulled it back. Slow down, she said. Slow. He looked at her. His eyes were wet, not from the wind. Then Mabel reached into the bag and pulled out the bread. She tore off a piece and placed it in his palm. He closed his fingers around it and brought it to his mouth, chewed slowly. His eyes closed, not from cold now, from relief. She watched him eat the bread she was bringing home for dinner, the bread that was supposed to be for her and Ruth tonight. She didn't flinch. She tore another piece and put it in his hand. He ate that too. Then Mabel did something that Earl Dixon would talk about for the rest of his life. She unzipped her coat. The too small coat. The only coat she owned. The coat she'd worn every day since October. She took it off and draped it over the man's shoulders. She was standing in a hoodie now, in -10-degree wind. The cold hit her body like a blade. She felt it in her ribs, in her teeth, in the spaces between her fingers. She wrapped her arms around herself and looked at the man. We need to get you inside. She looked up and down the street. Empty. Nobody. The storm was closing in fast. Snowflakes the size of quarters coming down sideways. Earl's store was 2 blocks back. Mabel ran. She sprinted through the wind, the cold tearing through her hoodie like it was paper. She reached the store and banged on the door with both fists. Earl was inside, locking up. He turned and saw her through the glass. No coat, shaking, wild-eyed. He opened the door. "Mr. Dixon, there's a man at the bus stop. He's freezing. He needs help. Please." Earl didn't ask questions. He grabbed his truck keys off the hook behind the counter, and they were moving. He drove to the bus stop in under a minute. They found the man listing sideways on the bench, Mabel's coat still draped over his shoulders. He was barely conscious. His breathing was thin. Earl took one arm. Mabel took the other. They lifted him into the truck. He was heavier than he looked. His body was stiff from the cold. They brought him into the back room of the store, the stock room. Concrete floor, metal shelves stacked with boxes. But there was a space heater in the corner. Mabel turned it on. She found the wool blanket Earl kept folded on a shelf for overnight inventory shifts. She wrapped it around the man. Earl made instant coffee. Black. Hot. He pressed the mug into the man's hands and helped him hold it steady. Mabel sat on an overturned milk crate beside him. She didn't say anything. She just watched. Watched his color come back. Watched his breathing deepen. Watched his hands stop shaking degree by degree. It took 20 minutes. Then the man spoke his first full sentence. "Thank you." His voice was hoarse, cracked, like he hadn't used it in hours. Then, quieter, almost to himself, "You gave me your milk." Mabel shrugged. "You needed it more." He looked at her. Not the way strangers look at strangers. He looked at her like he was trying to understand something he hadn't expected to find. Not just gratitude, something deeper. Like he was recalculating the whole world in his head. While the man warmed up, Mabel noticed the gold ring again. Under the stockroom light, the engraving was clearer now. A tiny image, a cow and a wheat stalk intertwined. Delicate, professional. The kind of engraving that costs money. She thought it was odd, but she said nothing. He asked her name. "Mabel." He asked where she lived. She hesitated. She didn't give strangers her address. "Close by," she said. He nodded, didn't push. Earl stepped outside to make a phone call. He dialed the non-emergency line. Asked if anyone had reported a missing person in the area. 20 minutes later, a car pulled up outside the store. But it wasn't a taxi. And it wasn't an ambulance. It was a black SUV, spotless, engine purring. A driver in a dark suit stepped out, snow landing on his shoulders. He walked into the stockroom, and the moment he saw the man on the chair, his face went white. "Mr. Whitfield?" "Sir, we've been looking for you for 4 hours." Mabel looked at Earl. Earl looked at the driver. The driver was already pulling out his phone. The man, Charles Whitfield, stood. He was steadier now, taller than he'd looked on that bench. He folded the blanket neatly, set it on the chair, and buttoned Mabel's coat over his shirt like it belonged there. He walked toward the door, then stopped, turned to Mabel. "What's your last name?" "Anderson." He nodded slowly. Then he did something neither Mabel nor Earl expected. He pulled the gold ring off his finger and held it out to her. "Keep this," he said. "I'll come back for it." Mabel looked at the ring, looked at Earl. Earl looked at the ring. Neither of them understood. She took it. Charles Whitfield stepped into the black SUV. The door closed. The taillights glowed red through the falling snow. And then he was gone. Mabel stood in the doorway of Earl's stockroom, wearing a hoodie in a blizzard, holding a gold ring that meant nothing to her. Not yet. "All right, hold on. I gotta stop here. Because this girl, she literally gave away her last food in a blizzard, took her coat off for a stranger. Bro, she's standing there in a hoodie in -10 weather. I'm not gonna lie, if that were me, I don't know if I would have done that. I really don't." The SUV disappeared into the snow, and Mabel Anderson walked home with an empty bag and a gold ring she didn't understand. No coat, no milk, no bread. Just the ring in her mitten and the cold eating through her hoodie like acid. The wind found every gap, her wrists, her neck, the strip of skin between her hoodie and her jeans. Fingers went numb first, then her ears, then her thoughts. She walked faster. By the time she reached the house on Elm Street, her hands wouldn't close. She pushed the front door open with her shoulder. Ruth was in her chair, quilt pulled to her chin. The lamp beside her was the only light in the house. She looked up when Mabel walked in. "Where's the milk, baby?" Mabel stood in the doorway, snow melting off her hoodie onto the floor, empty hands, no coat. She told a half-truth. "I gave it to someone who needed it, Grandma. I'm sorry." Ruth didn't scold, didn't raise her voice. She just looked at Mabel for a long moment, the kind of look that holds a whole conversation without a single word. "Come sit by me. We'll be all right." They found a can of chicken broth in the back of the cupboard, behind a box of instant grits and an almost empty jar of peanut butter. Ruth heated it on the stove. They split it. 1 can, 2 cups. Not enough for 1 person. Definitely not for 2. But Ruth hummed a hymn while they ate, low and steady. And Mabel leaned against her grandmother's shoulder. And in that cold house with frost on the windows and nothing in the fridge, it felt like enough. Before bed, Mabel sat on the edge of her mattress and held the gold ring under the lamp. The cow and wheat engraving was delicate, professional, not something from a pawn shop. This was custom work. She turned it over. On the inside of the band, in tiny engraved letters, C.W., established 1982. She didn't know what C.W. meant, didn't know who this man was. She just knew he had pulled this ring off his own finger, pressed it into her hand, and said 5 words she couldn't stop hearing. "I'll come back for it." She put the ring on her nightstand and stared at the ceiling until she fell asleep. Next morning, Earl called the house. He told Ruth everything. The man on the bench, the milk, the coat, the black SUV, the driver in the dark suit who called the man Mr. Whitfield. Ruth listened without interrupting. When Earl finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "That's my Mabel." Earl offered to bring groceries. Ruth said no. Earl offered again. Ruth said no again. The third time, Earl didn't ask. He just showed up at noon. He brought milk, bread, eggs, and a bag of oranges. Set them on the kitchen counter and talked about the weather for a few minutes. Before he left, Mabel noticed an envelope tucked behind the bread. She opened it later. $40 in small bills. She didn't mention it to Ruth. Ruth didn't ask. That was how they accepted help. Sideways, silently, with their dignity still intact. On Monday, Mrs. Hayes asked the senior class to write a short reflection about their weekend. Mabel thought about the bench, the milk, the man's blue lips, the ring on her nightstand. She wrote, "I watched the snow fall, and it made everything look new." No mention of the man. No mention of what she gave away. No mention of the ring. She didn't seek credit, didn't tell the story to anyone, not her classmates, not Mrs. Hayes. That was Mabel. Kindness without performance, generosity without a receipt. But what she didn't know, what nobody in Collinsville knew yet, was that 300 miles away, someone was looking for her. 300 miles away, in a glass office tower in Milwaukee, a man who hadn't stopped thinking about a bottle of milk was making phone calls. Charles Whitfield sat behind a desk the size of a small car. Floor-to-ceiling windows. The city skyline stretched out behind him like a postcard. A man in a vest brought him coffee on a tray. On the wall to his left, a framed logo. A cow and a wheat stalk intertwined. The same emblem that was on the ring. Charles picked up the phone. "I need you to find a young woman named Mabel Anderson, town called Collinsville. She's about 18, lives with her grandmother." The person on the other end asked why. Charles paused, looked out the window, then said, quietly, "Because she gave me her dinner." Back in Collinsville, things started to shift in small, strange ways. 3 days after that Friday night, a white delivery truck pulled up outside Earl Dixon's store. The logo on the side, a cow and a wheat stalk. Whitfield Dairy. A man in a company polo walked in, clean cut, clipboard in hand. He asked Earl a few questions about a young woman who helped someone last Friday evening near the bus stop on Crestwood Avenue. Earl crossed his arms. "Who's asking?" The man didn't answer directly. He just left a business card on the counter and walked out. Earl picked it up, read it once, read it again. Whitfield Dairy Cooperative, Office of the Chairman. He stared at that card for a long time. That evening, Earl drove to Ruth's house. He sat at the kitchen table and slid the card across to her. Ruth picked it up, held it close to the lamp, squinted at the fine print. "Chairman," she said. "That man on the bench was a chairman?" Mabel was standing in the doorway. She went to her room, came back with the ring, set it on the table next to the business card. They all looked at it together. The engraving. C.W. The cow. The wheat. Charles Whitfield. The same logo on the truck that had been driving down their street for as long as any of them could remember. Ruth sat back in her chair. Earl rubbed his jaw. Mabel just stared at the ring. Nobody said anything for a while. The man Mabel gave her last milk to wasn't just some lost stranger. He was Charles Whitfield, founder and CEO of the largest dairy cooperative in the upper Midwest. A man whose company supplied milk to 6 states. A man whose products sat on the shelf of the very store where Mabel worked. And in exactly 8 days, he was coming back to Collinsville. But not alone. What happened next is the part of this story people still talk about. 11 days after that frozen Friday night, a Saturday morning, Collinsville was quiet. Frost on every window, smoke rising from chimneys in thin gray lines. The kind of morning where the whole town moves slow. Then, the convoy came. 3 black SUVs, 1 white van with a logo on the side, a cow and a wheat stalk. Whitfield Dairy. They rolled down Main Street in a line, engines rumbling low, tires crunching on the frozen road. They parked right in front of Earl Dixon's store. In a town of 3,000, 3 black SUVs is front-page news. People came out of their houses, stood on porches, pulled back curtains. A couple of men from the diner across the street walked out with their coffee still in hand. Brenda Stokes was on her porch within 30 seconds, arms crossed, neck craning. The rear door of the first SUV opened, and Charles Whitfield stepped out. He looked nothing like the man on the bench. Dark overcoat, cashmere scarf, clean-shaven, polished shoes. He stood tall, straighter than a man his age usually stands. His eyes swept the street like he was measuring it. But Mabel, watching from across the road, recognized him instantly. Not the clothes, not the posture, the eyes. The way he held his hands, one folded over the other, fingers still, and the ring finger on his right hand, bare. Charles walked into Earl's store. The bell above the door jingled. Earl was behind the counter, same as always. He looked up, and his body went still. "I'm looking for Mabel Anderson," Charles said. Earl didn't move for a moment. Then he picked up the phone and called Ruth. 15 minutes later, Mabel walked through the door. She stopped just inside. The store felt different. Not the shelves, not the lights, the air. There were people. Ruth was there, sitting in the folding chair Earl kept behind the register. Earl stood beside her. A few neighbors had drifted in. Word travels fast when black SUVs park on Main Street. They lined the edges of the store, like witnesses at something they couldn't name yet. And in the middle of it all, Charles Whitfield. He saw Mabel, and something in his face shifted. Not a smile, something quieter. Something that looked like recognition, not of her face, but of what she'd done. He extended his hand. Not formal, not stiff, just steady. Mabel shook it. "You kept my ring?" he asked. Mabel reached into her jacket pocket. She'd been carrying it every single day since that night. Hadn't missed one. She held it out on her open palm. "You said you'd come back for it." Charles looked at the ring sitting in her hand, looked at her, and didn't take it. Not yet. He turned to face the room. Earl, Ruth. The neighbors pressed against the shelves by the door. Everyone was still. He spoke. "My name is Charles Whitfield. I'm the founder of Whitfield Dairy Cooperative." He paused. Let that land. Let the name connect to the trucks they saw every week, to the milk on the shelves behind him, to the logo on the ring in Mabel's hand. 11 days ago, I had a cardiac episode after a board meeting in Madison. I stepped outside the building for air. I got disoriented. I walked away and I kept walking. I don't remember how I ended up in Collinsville. I don't remember sitting down on that bench. He looked at Mabel. What I remember is a young woman kneeling beside me in the snow, holding a bottle of milk to my mouth. Her last bottle. The only food she had to bring home to her sick grandmother. The room was silent. Not quiet. Silent. The kind of silence where you can hear the hum of the freezer in the back and nothing else. My doctors told me later that I was roughly 30 minutes from hypothermia-induced cardiac arrest. He stopped, swallowed. His voice dropped to something barely above a whisper. If she hadn't stopped, I wouldn't be standing here. Ruth's hand found the edge of the counter. She gripped it hard. Her knuckles went white. Her other hand pressed flat against her chest. Mabel stared at the floor. She didn't look up. Her jaw was tight. She was holding everything inside the way she always did. Steady, quiet, contained. But her hands were shaking. Just barely. Just enough to notice. A woman near the door put her hand over her mouth. Earl closed his eyes for a second, opened them wet. Charles took a breath, steadied himself. "So I need to ask you all something, and I need you to hear it, not as charity, not as pity. I need you to hear it as someone who owes his life to your granddaughter." He reached into his overcoat and pulled out a leather folder, dark brown, thick, the kind that holds documents with weight behind them. He looked at Mabel. "I'd like to show you something." The ring was still sitting on Mabel's open palm, the cow and the wheat stalk catching the fluorescent light of a corner store in a town most people had never heard of. The foreshadowed ring. The chauffeur in the dark suit, the dairy truck on Main Street, the monogram on his collar, the pale tan line on his wrist. Every piece, clicking into place. The man Mabel saved wasn't just rich, he was dying. She didn't just give him milk, she saved his life. With a bottle that cost $2.10, bought with coins counted out of a mason jar, the last food in the house. And now he was standing in Earl Dixon's corner store, holding a leather folder that was about to change everything. What was in that folder would change not just Mabel's life, but the entire town of Collinsville. Charles opened the leather folder on Earl's counter. Inside, architectural renderings, financial documents, and a letter on Whitfield Dairy Cooperative letterhead. He spread them out carefully, like a man who'd been planning this for 11 days straight. He looked at Mabel. "There are 3 things I'd like to do, and I need you to hear all 3 before you say anything." Mabel nodded. She didn't trust her voice. "First," Charles said, "you." He slid a document across the counter toward her, a letter from the Whitfield Foundation, a registered nonprofit under the Whitfield Dairy umbrella, a full college scholarship, tuition, room and board, books, supplies, at any state university in Wisconsin. And if she wanted to go further, graduate school, professional degree, the foundation would cover that too. No cap, no expiration. But it wasn't just for her. "I'm calling it the Mabel Anderson Kindness Scholarship," Charles said. "And starting next year, it will be offered to one graduating senior from Collinsville every single year. The criteria won't be grades alone. It'll be character, kindness, the kind of thing that doesn't show up on a transcript but changes the world anyway." Mabel didn't react at first. She stared at the letter, read the first line, read it again. Then she looked at Ruth. Ruth's hand was over her mouth. Her eyes were full. She wasn't making a sound, but her shoulders were trembling. Mabel had applied to 3 colleges last fall, all state schools, all with financial aid forms she filled out on the library computer because they didn't have internet at home. She'd been terrified, not of rejection, but of acceptance. Because getting in without money is worse than not getting in at all. It's a door you can see through but can't open. And now that door was gone. Not opened. Gone. Like it had never been there. Charles waited a moment. Then he continued. Second, your grandmother. He looked at Ruth. Whitfield Dairy will fully cover Mrs. Anderson's medical expenses through a partnership with the county health clinic. Insulin, checkups, specialist visits, prescriptions, all of it. Fully funded. No co-pays, no limits. He paused. Your granddaughter saved my life. The least I can do is help protect yours. Ruth sat down. Not in the folding chair. She missed it by 6 inches and landed on the edge of a stacked crate. Earl caught her arm. She didn't notice. Her legs simply couldn't hold her anymore. $15. That was the number that had kept Ruth awake at night. $15 more on her insulin, and they couldn't pay the electric bill. She had sat at that kitchen table doing the math with her granddaughter, pretending it would be fine, knowing it wouldn't. And now a man in a cashmere coat was telling her she'd never do that math again. She looked at Mabel, then at Charles, then back at Mabel. Her lips moved, but nothing came out. She just pressed both hands together in her lap and held on. The room was so still, you could hear the clock on the wall behind the register. Tick, tick, tick. Charles picked up the architectural renderings, unfolded them across the counter. Floor plans, site layouts, a map of Collinsville with a plot of land circled in red on the east side of town. Third, he said, this town. Whitfield Dairy would open a distribution hub in Collinsville, a modest facility, warehouse, delivery coordination, local supply chain management. It would create around 40 new jobs, full-time, benefits, the kind of work that keeps a town alive. He chose Collinsville specifically, not because it made the best business sense, not because the logistics were ideal, because of what happened here. I built my company on the idea that dairy should reach every table, Charles said. He looked at Mabel. An 18-year-old with $3.80 taught me I'd been failing at that. Milk was sitting on the shelves of my own supply chain, and the girl who saved my life couldn't afford a single bottle. He let that sit. Nobody in the room moved. Mabel was quiet for a long time. She looked at the architectural drawings, the scholarship letter, the medical partnership document. She looked at Ruth. She looked at Earl. She looked at the floor. Then she held out the gold ring. "You should take this back," she said. Charles shook his head, slowly. "Keep it. You earned it." Mabel looked at the ring in her hand. The cow and the wheat stalk. C.W. Est, 1982. She closed her fingers around it and put it back in her pocket. She didn't smile. Not yet. The weight of what was happening was too big for a smile. Too heavy. Too sudden. That would come later, in quiet moments, when it finally sank in. Right now, she just nodded. Once. Steady. Earl Dixon leaned against the counter and let out a long breath he didn't know he'd been holding. He looked at the rendering of the distribution hub. 40 new jobs. In Collinsville. In a town that had been losing people for 20 years. A town where the hardware store closed, where the bus routes got cut, where good people left because there was nothing to stay for. He said quietly, to no one in particular, "I'll be damned." Ruth finally spoke. She reached across and took Mabel's hand, held it tight, looked at her granddaughter with the same eyes that had watched her iron school clothes on the kitchen table every night. "I always told you," Ruth said. "You help the person in front of you." Charles nodded. "She did. And now I'm trying to help the people in front of me." And that's when everything in Collinsville started to change. 3 months later, the Whitfield distribution hub broke ground on the east side of town. Trucks, concrete mixers, men in hard hats measuring dirt that had been an empty field for as long as anyone could remember. Tanya Willis, a reporter from the county news station, drove out to cover it. Her segment ran that evening. The headline across the screen read, Billionaire returns to small town after girl saves his life with a bottle of milk. 42 jobs were posted within the first 2 weeks. 310 applications came in from across the county. People who'd left Collinsville years ago started calling, asking if it was real. It was real. Earl Dixon was hired as community liaison for the hub. He knew every family in town, knew who needed work, knew who was reliable, knew who'd been hanging on by a thread. He finally hired part-time help for his store, something he'd never been able to afford. Mabel's old position went to another senior who needed it just as much as she had. And Mabel. She got her acceptance letter on a Tuesday in March. University of Wisconsin-Madison. Full scholarship confirmed. She read it standing in the kitchen, still wearing her school clothes. Read it twice. Then set it on the table and sat down because her legs felt strange. Ruth picked it up, read it slowly, then pressed it against her chest and closed her eyes. Mabel Anderson would be the first person in her family to attend college. She got a new coat, a real one that fit, sleeves that reached her wrists, new boots, actual winter boots, insulated, waterproof. Ruth bought her a desk for her room, a real desk, not the kitchen table with a towel on it. Mabel started a tutoring circle at school. After classes, 3 days a week, she sat in the library with younger students and helped them with reading and math. She didn't get paid. She didn't ask for credit. Mrs. Hayes told a colleague, "I've never seen a senior so driven and so humble at the same time." The Mabel Anderson Kindness Scholarship was officially established that spring. Dr. Elaine Moore, the school principal, announced it at a senior assembly. 1 full ride every year for a graduating senior from Collinsville. The criteria: academic effort plus demonstrated community kindness. Not test scores alone. Character. The kind of thing that doesn't show up on a transcript but changes the world anyway. Ruth's health turned around. With proper medical support, regular insulin, checkups, a specialist she could actually see, her numbers stabilized within 3 months. She had energy again, color in her face, strength in her legs. She started walking to Earl's store again, first time in over a year. Earl saw her come through the door and had to look away for a second. Ruth began volunteering at the church food pantry, sorting donations, packing bags, carrying boxes to cars. She told Mabel one evening, "Now that someone took care of me, I can take care of others again." The distribution hub brought more than jobs. The county repaved the road leading to the facility. A new bus route was added connecting Collinsville to the neighboring town. Students didn't have to walk to school in the winter anymore. Not just Mabel, all of them. Brenda Stokes, the neighbor who once said Ruth should put that girl in the system, knocked on Ruth's door one Tuesday afternoon. She was holding a casserole dish covered in foil. She didn't apologize. Not directly. She just stood in the doorway and said, "Your girl did good, Ruth." Ruth looked at her for a moment. Then she opened the door wider and said, "Come in. I'll put the coffee on." That's how healing works in a small town. Not with speeches, with casseroles and doorsteps. A local diner put up a framed photo of Mabel and Charles from the news segment. Underneath, someone taped a handwritten sign. "Kindness served here." The story kept spreading. Regional papers picked it up first. Then a national morning show ran a 2-minute segment. The phrase, "the milk that saved a life," trended briefly on social media. Letters started arriving at Earl's store addressed to Mabel. From young people in other states, from teachers, from a retired dairy farmer in Vermont who wrote 3 pages by hand and said the story made him cry. Earl kept every letter in a shoebox behind the register. He never told Mabel how many there were. He just smiled every time a new one came in. But the part of this story that stays with me isn't the scholarship. It isn't the jobs. It isn't the distribution hub or the news coverage or the letters in Earl's shoebox. It's what Mabel did 6 months later. Summer now, July. The snow was gone. The trees along Crestwood Avenue were full and green. The air smelled like cut grass and warm asphalt. Mabel was walking home from Earl's store. Same route she always took. past the laundromat, past the empty lot, past the bus stop on Crestwood Avenue. Someone was on the bench, a woman, white, maybe mid-30s. She was sitting with her shoulders curved forward, a suitcase on the ground beside her. Her eyes were red. She was crying softly, the kind of crying people do when they think no one's watching. Mabel didn't know her, didn't know her story, didn't know if it was a car breakdown or a bad phone call or something worse. She sat down next to her, didn't say anything at first, just sat. The woman wiped her eyes, looked at Mabel, looked away. Mabel reached into her bag, pulled out a bottle of milk and a granola bar, set them on the bench between them. The woman looked down at the milk, then at Mabel. "You don't have to do that." Mabel shrugged. The same shrug. The exact same shrug from that frozen Friday night 6 months ago. "You look like you need it more." The gold ring was on a chain around Mabel's neck now. She wore it every day, not as jewelry, as a reminder of a night when she had nothing and gave it all away, and it came back to her in ways she never could have imagined. Ruth told her once, "That ring isn't about a rich man. It's about what you chose when nobody was watching." Charles Whitfield visits Collinsville once a year now, drives himself. No convoy, no SUVs. He parks on Main Street, walks into Earl's store and buys a single bottle of whole milk. Then he walks to the bench on Crestwood Avenue and sits for a few minutes. Doesn't talk, just sits. A reporter asked him once why he keeps coming back. He said, "That bench is where I learned the most important thing I've ever learned in business or in life. The people with the least to give are the ones who give the most." And Mabel's notebook, the one she's kept since she was 15, has a new entry. The last one on the page, written in her neat, steady handwriting. "A stranger sat on a bench. I gave him milk. He changed my life. Now I'm going to change someone else's." Real talk. I chose this story because Mabel messes with my head. Like prejudice, poverty, every reason to walk past that man. And she didn't. She just didn't. No audience, no reward, just her and a bottle of milk. That's the kind of quiet kindness people say doesn't exist anymore. But it does. Mabel proved it. If this story moved you, even a little, hit that like button. Share it with someone who needs to hear it tonight. Subscribe and turn on notifications. I'll keep finding these stories. I promise. Drop me a comment. What would you have done in Mabel's shoes? Would you have given away your last bottle of milk? I'll see you in the next one.